right, according to my watch, it's time to get started. So we will begin this morning taking any prayer requests anyone has, and then John is going to lead us in our prayer to start our class this morning. So anybody have any prayer requests? Okay, Ronnie's brother Richard passed away day before yesterday. Okay, all right. So let's keep his family in our prayers. Yes, sir.
We're getting 2 new placements this week. So
I heard about that. So,
that goes well.
and you're getting two of them, right? So the Lutz are getting a new placement of some foster kids. Tell us a little about it, Derek.
3-year-old boy named Days and a 1-year-old girl named London.
Okay, awesome. Did all of you get the email Shantae sent out?
Yeah.
So awesome. So if you can help in any way, that would be greatly appreciated, I know. Anything else? All right, going once. What's that? You did make it back. Yeah. We prayed for you last week because you had just gotten on the plane, I think. So, all right, John, would you like to start us, please, sir?
Father, we thank you for a wonderful, nice, starting to be summer kind of day, Father, and starting to not be reminded of your glory, Father, and we look at your creation and reminded how blessed we are to live in Montana, Father. We pray that you'll be with us this morning, Father, as we study your word and worship you, that you'll bless those acts on our behalf, Father, and that you'll bless us as we leave here and go back out into the world, Father. We do want you to remember, Father, we have several families in our midst, Father, that are taking on foster children, Father. We want you to bless those families and, Father, let those children know particularly that you love them and help us as a congregation act to support that really generous act on the part of those families, Father, and you help us understand how we can do that. Father, pray that you be with Ronnie Davison's brother's family, Father, and for his passing. He's their great Father. Father, we again thank you for all that you do for us, and pray that you bless this congregation, Father, as we continue to serve you and be in the love of Christ.
Amen. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. So last week we ended on page 15. We kind of stopped while we were discussing Psalm 31, verse 7 and 8. And I would like to go back and revisit that for just a little bit, because to me this is one of the really important things about the church loving one another the way that we should. And we're looking, at ways that God has loved and how we can imitate that. So in Psalm 31, verse 7 and 8, David says, I will be glad and rejoice in your love, for you saw my affliction and knew the anguish of my soul. You have not handed me over to the enemy, but have set my feet in a spacious place. And then in the stuff that I'd written there on page 15, next to the last paragraph there says, we should love people enough to know their affliction, to know the anguish of their soul, and to walk them through it, no matter how repulsive it might be. That's the sacrificial, compassionate love we are to practice. Now, did anybody write anything after that? Any questions you might have about these verses, or any examples you can share about that in your own life? Yeah.
So sometimes it's not that we don't want to help them, it's that their issues compound our own issues that we have been struggling with and have been afraid to address publicly.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah. We want to help, but their issues compound our own issues that we've been struggling with and don't really want to admit in public. Yeah. Diane.
I've found that you really can't be that close to that many people. You know what I mean? It takes a lot of time and energy, but that's what makes God's family so great, because I might be able to help you, or Sean might be able to help Al. It's just
Yeah.
Being close to the family, somebody, hopefully,
Yeah,
if you know something, I can't help you, but I know someone who can.
yeah. That's a really good point, Diane. I appreciate you bringing that out, because there are times that you know, well, here's what I wrote down at the bottom of that. I said most of us are fixers, and if we can't fix someone's problem, we don't know what to do with it, you know. And what we can do, or then I wrote, what can we do when we can't fix it for them? And that's a really great point, is there are experiences other people in the congregation have had that are similar situations, that they may be in a better place than we are to help with that right now. But if we don't know the other people in the congregation, we can't even point them to someone. And that's why I think it's so important that the church family comes to know each other well enough that we kind of know some of the stories of some of the people. But you brought up a good point too, and that is there are some things we don't want out in public, right? And so if we don't want everybody knowing about them, then nobody does know that we've been through that struggle as well. Why is it we don't want people knowing our struggles and hurts and things that we're going through?
Because we're perfect.
What's that?
Because we're perfect.
That's right. We're supposed to be perfect. You know, we've been washed in the blood of the Lamb. Our sins are as our sin stains that were like scarlet are now white as snow, and so we don't have issues, right? So why don't we want them known?
Sometimes it's embarrassing, and sometimes you feel like we're just being criticized.
You got to speak up just a little bit.
Because it's embarrassing, and sometimes we think we'll just be criticized for it.
It's embarrassing, and what will people think of us? We might be criticized because we're not perfect. The church is supposed to be perfect, right? Where do we ever get that idea that we're supposed to be perfect?
I don't know, because we're all messes that are looking to be put together the right way.
Exactly. So if we're all messes, why can't we just admit that we're all messes?
Because the Bible says be perfect.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And what does that mean, Roman?
Just that.
What's that?
I'll let you in.
Bible does. It says, be perfect, but what else does it say after that? Be perfect as God is perfect. Yeah. Well, that ain't going to happen. Not if we interpret perfect to be without fault, without flaw, without sin. We will never be that way. So that's an impossibility. I don't think the Bible would tell us we have to do something that's impossible for us to do. So I don't think that's what perfect means there. So what would it mean then? Who knows? We can just ignore that one, right? We don't know what. I think it means about being complete. And I think really for us it means we need to be in Him. His perfection becomes our perfection. His completeness becomes our completeness. So how do we get... Oh, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say that I think part of it is that we're supposed to be perfect in that we're allowing Him to work in us
Yeah.
and change us.
Right.
So that people can see what has been done in us.
Right. And that's it. That they can see what He's done in us. The only way people are going to see that is if they know where we were before and what we've become afterwards. But if we'll never share with them what we were before, we don't have any story to tell. We can't give God the glory for changing us and molding us and all of that kind of stuff, healing us even. So what can we do as a church to get better at being comfortable in each other's messiness?
Spend time together, one-on-one.
Spend time together, one-on-one.
Push yourself out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, yeah. But we can spend time together and hear each other's messiness, but then sometimes that can just give us good ammo to talk about them behind their backs, right? Yeah. So how can we get better at being in their messiness the way we're supposed to? I do think you're very right. Spend more time together, get to know people better. Speak up. Forgive as God forgave. Yeah. Yeah, He accepts us the way we are. We should accept others the way they are. Jerry.
Love, because love covers a multitude of sins.
Wow. Yeah, it does. Love covers a multitude of sin. That's why, we're spending so much time talking about loving and the way that we're supposed to love, because it's easy to just use the words, but it's more difficult when we're in the trenches, right? Any other thoughts or comments on that? I do have to say, when I first started preaching full time, had a couple came into my office, said they needed to talk to me about something, and I said, okay. So they came in, and they started sharing some marital struggles they were having in the bedroom, in the marital bed. I was very uncomfortable because I grew up in a home where you didn't talk about sex, okay? If you did, you got your mouth washed out with soap, right? And so to have an older couple sitting in my office talking about this was very, very uncomfortable for me. And I remember thinking, they didn't prepare me for this in preaching school. There were a lot of things they forgot to tell us about, But I remember, and so I'm sitting there the whole time trying to think, how am I supposed to act in this situation? And it was, again, one of those times where I thought about, what would Jesus do if he was sitting here? Would this shock him? No, it wouldn't. Because he's already, believe it or not, he's already been in their marital bed. He knows everything that's going on there. And he's not disgusted with them. He's not shocked by what's going on there. He's very well aware of the struggles that they're having. And he loves them in spite of it. And so that's what I tried to do as well. And it's a lot easier to say than it is to do, but I think we're told that we are to love as Christ loved us. And I think we need to think about these things and put them into practice. Loving people even in the midst of their mess, and even when it makes us feel uncomfortable to hear about it. Diane.
When you work with parents, foster parents, there's I don't remember what they call it, but it's called compassion fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
Where, where I work, these parents had 5 or 6, 7 kids, and everyone had a different issue. And you have compassion for this child, and take care of this, and take care of this.
Yeah.
And that's why they need frequent breaks, because you just can't keep that up.
Right.
It's not that you don't love them, you just need a break from that.
Yeah.
And I think it happens particularly with churches, and particularly with ministers and wives, and maybe elders too, but I feel like I can get that within my family or even with friends.
Right.
Sometimes I just need to take a little break.
Yeah.
Keep praying, but take a little break because it's too much. It's too much.
Right.
Emotionally to
Yeah.
handle something.
Yeah.
Which I think is fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the reality is, sometimes it can be overwhelming, especially if we think it's our job to fix the problem. Because it's really not our job to fix the problem. It's our job to walk with those who are going through a problem and help them stay focused on God, who is walking through that with them as well. Again, I wrote, most of us are fixers. If someone comes to us and shares something that they're dealing with, we want to fix it. In fact, when Dory and I first got married, she would come to me and she'd be talking about something, and I would tell her what she needed to do to fix that, right? Yeah. And after a while, Dory finally told me one time, she said, I'm not asking you to fix it for me. I just want you to listen. And I think that's a key to loving people in the midst of their messiness as well, is when they come to us, it's not always that they want us to fix it. They just need somebody with them. They need somebody to to reaffirm that they are still loved by God, even in the midst of their messiness. And that, I think, is our biggest job. If we take it on ourselves, then it's real easy to reach that point where I just can't do this anymore. But if we realize it's not my problem, they just want somebody to walk through it with them. It doesn't build up quite as quickly. It
I
can.
think you want somebody to hear you.
Yeah, yeah. You just want somebody to hear and understand your pain. You know, like he says, you saw my affliction and you knew the anguish of my soul. And there was comfort in that for David. And I think there's comfort for all of us, for people, other people who are going to know the anguish of our soul and not condemn us because of it. All right, any other thoughts or comments on that before we move over to Matthew chapter 5? All right, Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 through 48. Let's all turn over there. And then I'm going to have someone read that for us out loud here in just a moment. But we'll give everybody time to get there. Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 through 48. Someone can read that out loud for us now, please.
You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that. Be perfect, therefore, as your Father, your heavenly Father, is perfect.
Yeah. Be perfect. I think we heard that somewhere before. And in that context, he's talking about loving your enemies, the way that God loves those who are his enemies. So what are your thoughts on that? What did somebody write down? Don't just greet the people you know. So what Andy is saying is, from now on, if she comes up and says good morning to you and greets you, that's because you're one of her enemies, right?
No, but Andy is a good greeter and a good hugger.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Anybody else write anything in that one? Well, why don't we brainstorm a scenario? What would an enemy look like? Or what would someone do to us to be labeled an enemy?
Hurt someone I love.
If someone hurts someone you love, they become your enemy. Okay? Anybody else? Well, this is a good cop-out. We're told to love our enemies, and so we just don't have any because we can't define it, right? It makes it easy.
There are times I feel like the federal government is my enemy.
Yep.
I
Yep.
try to pray for them.
Yeah. What makes them your enemy? What do they do to become your enemy?
The blatant stupidity. I'm sorry. I can't find a nice way to say it.
So blatantly stupid people are Brian's enemies.
They, it bothers me with the open borders and
Sure.
shutting down domestic oil production. Saying we need to go to electric vehicles and then they start shutting down our sources of electricity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. We could go a long time on that, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
So you got a hand there and then back. So Ashley.
I know for me, I have, like, this hits really close to home because I have people within my family.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about Aaron.
Right.
Just that have heard you over and over and over and over again.
Right.
And it's so hard not to be bitter and resentful.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, just actively trying to pray for them because
Yeah.
prayer changes everything. But that's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so easy for me to skip over them when I'm praying for my family.
Yeah. And that brings up a good point. What do we pray for them? Lord, please just destroy them.
Yeah, right.
You know? There was when I was going through my divorce and was wrestling with a lot of anger and bitterness and stuff, a good friend of mine told me during the midst of that, he said, Lance, you need to just bathe in the Psalms. And I remember having this conversation very well because I said, what do you mean bathe in the Psalms? And he said, just spend a lot of time in the Psalms. And I said, the Psalms are full of David's anger and frustration. Why would I want to bathe in anger and frustration when I'm struggling with anger and frustration? And he said, because no matter what David is going through, at the end he always comes out to, but God is in control. And so every day I would read through Psalms, and I had sticky notes up there that were my prayers, and they were, God smite my enemies kind of thing. And that wasn't done out of meanness, but it was done to remind me that God is the one who's going to deal with them and not me. And so it was, it felt kind of good. Say, God, would you please deal with them? And I wanted it to be me, but it was also a reminder to me that God was in control and not me. Martin.
When you brought this up, my first thought was, who are my enemies?
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you're going through a divorce, you feel like there's an enemy
Sure.
there.
Yeah.
But today, I don't think I have any enemies the way it used to be. I mean, there's probably some people that don't like me,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not hurting me.
Right.
So, right now, I don't think I have any enemies.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you didn't give an answer to that question.
Yeah. Yeah. Because sometimes things are going well in life and nobody's really out to get us, and so we don't really feel like we have enemies. So, when Jesus was speaking here in the Sermon on the Mount, who was he speaking to? Who was his audience?
Jews.
Predominantly Jews, yeah, for the most part. Who were the enemies of the Jews?
Everybody else.
Everybody else, kind of that way, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah. There have been times in our fellowship that we kind of considered everybody that wasn't us as our enemies too. So what is this passage really teaching about how to deal with your enemies? Dory.
I don't think that God really wants to look at them like enemies. I mean, I'm sort of like Ashley. There's people in my family that have said things to hurt me. There's, other people that have said things that hurt me. But I think it's sort of like Jesus was on the cross. He said, forgive them because they know not what they do.
Right.
So you try to look at them as sort of lost, and they are in need of prayer. They
Mhm.
need Jesus in their life. So it's not always about what they do to you. It's about them hurting or whatever in their life that's going on. They
Yeah. And in some ways, that goes back to what we were talking about Psalm 31. Unless we kind of know people, know what they're going through, it's hard for us to really, it's kind of like that old saying about putting yourself in their shoes. If we stop and kind of consider where they're coming from or something, it may be a little easier to love them. Not always, but.
So would people who would deliberately kill your children be your enemies?
I would think so.
So God says, or I'm sorry, Paul says in Romans 5:8 that God loved us even though we were sinners,
Right?
implying that we murdered his son after being set in this wonderful creation where we rebelled
Mm-hmm.
and did every sort of wrong thing imaginable.
Right.
So I think if you look at this, he's really kind of saying we ought not to have enemies. Although there will be people who persecute you. But if we are to be God-like or, take on that sort of righteousness and likeness,
Right.
then we treat everybody well, just like God does.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't, to say that we shouldn't have enemies is, I think maybe we could misconstrue that. But I think you're right. What he's saying is God treats everybody the same. He sends rain upon everyone, sunshine upon everyone. And that's really the way we should be. If we are blessing people, we bless everyone. But when I'd written this, I want you to think of a time when you were mad at someone, so you treated them differently to kind of get them a little bit. And I know that we've all done that. Sometimes what we do, and this comes up somewhere else, I'd written it, we may not actively, blatantly say something to them to hurt their feelings. We just kind of do that passive-aggressive cold shoulder thing. Make sure that they know that we are upset with them. Have any of you ever done that? You raised your hand before I even finished the question. No?
And actually, that was my question, is not saying anything, is that hurtful?
Yes.
I mean, of course, and I also put, sometimes I throw really temper tantrums.
Yeah.
And say mean things. How is that better? I mean, sometimes things come out of my mouth. Your sermons have been really speaking to me the last couple of weeks.
Well, they always speak to me first. Trust me. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I say things and I'm like, I shouldn't be saying those things.
Yeah.
And so I try not to say anything. I just try to walk away.
Yeah.
Let myself cool down.
Yep.
But yeah, I've been told that I'm cold.
Yeah. And when you said, if we don't say anything, can that be hurtful? Sometimes that's even more hurtful, when we just close up and walk off and won't say anything at all. And a lot of times we do that knowing that it's going to be hurtful. And we want it to be hurtful. But what we do is we do that kind of stuff, so if somebody says, why are you treating your wife bad? I can say, I'm not treating her bad. I haven't said anything to her at all. And so then we're lying and deceiving ourselves. But Andy.
A lot of times I have to pension backfire and give them full order and forgive them.
Gotta go louder. My head's stuffed up, my hearing aids are working and everything, but you're just too soft spoken.
I said, I've tried to do it in the past, I never believe we'll be to it.
Yeah. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes we give them the cold shoulder and they don't even notice that they got the cold shoulder. And that makes us even more mad because we wanted to hurt them a little bit. And yet, what this passage tells us is we should treat them same as we treat everyone.
And I try to go back on forgiveness thing. I try to go back to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about him and how he forgave.
Yeah.
And that's how I'm to forgive.
Right.
And so I go to the cross.
Yeah.
And what did he say? After they beat him, crucified him,
Yeah.
rejected him,
Yep.
he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not
Mm-hmm.
Who did he say, I'm going to go to your house today? They hated one.
Right,
The one that was hated,
right.
he went to his house.
Yeah, he did.
And he ate with them, and he loved them.
Yeah,
And he did an enemy.
yeah, exactly. And go ahead.
Revenge does not make you feel better, and it does not heal hearts or wounds.
You said revenge does not make you feel better, and it does not heal.
It doesn't. If you take revenge on somebody, you think, well, this is gonna, make everything even. It doesn't. It doesn't make you feel any better. It doesn't heal anything. It doesn't help anything.
Sometimes it feels good. But it doesn't in the long run. And you're exactly right, So because there have been times like I've lost it and I have hurt because I thought that would make me feel better. It would make my point known and everything, and then afterwards you feel terrible because you know that that's not what you were supposed to do. So.
You can't take those words back.
Yeah, you can't.
Take that back.
No, you can't. You can't unspeak anything. Were you raising your hand or were you pointing to something?
I was saying we need microphones, and Alan was saying there's one right there.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you don't speak loudly into the microphone, it doesn't do any good. So there's something I was... Yes.
What's the difference between an enemy and someone you dislike? Because someone can dislike you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you know that, so do you consider that an enemy and you want to pray that they can forgive you for what you did or
Yeah.
whatever situation it is, that if you know they dislike you or you're their enemy, we need to pray about that too.
Mm-hmm. Your original question, what's the difference between somebody you just don't like and somebody that's your enemy? I don't know. I don't know that we can... I think we can get bogged down in trying to come up with a definite answer or a definite definition of enemy. But I think sometimes we do that so that we can say, oh, they're not my enemy. I don't have to love them. We look for loopholes by the way we define things. And I think there is a danger in that. My enemy, I think what he's getting at, my enemy is somebody that's not doing what I think they ought to be doing. And it upsets me. So I'm trying to think, but I can't remember it. So, any other comments on Matthew 5? All right, let's move on to Romans chapter 12, verse 10. Romans chapter 12, verse 10. If I can get someone to read that out loud for me.
Be devoted to one another in brotherly love, give preference to one another in honor.
Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Why do you think Paul uses that expression? Be devoted to one another in brotherly love.
Families is together fairly well.
Okay?
Yes, we have our difficulties, our issues, but when somebody hurts your family,
Okay?
you're going to step up to defend them.
And Paul is writing to the church, telling the church, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Now, does that exclude sisterly love? Okay, good. So as long as everybody understands that. But it has to do with family, because the church is family. So what does it mean to be devoted to one another? To care about one another. Okay? Help one another when they need it. Okay? Anybody else? Maybe Ephesians 5:21. So, okay.
It means to be invested.
Yeah. Be invested in each other.
And Acts talks also about be devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching.
Right.
We're devoted to be to our brother.
Right.
Be devoted to one another. We should be invested in.
Right. In what's going on in their life and just being involved in their lives. So there was another hand, Dory?
Yeah, I just think, too, sometimes we need to look for the good in people. I think we tend to focus on the bad things and what they've done wrong. And just need to look at the good, and that will help you get to know them.
Yeah.
Because you're wanting to help them.
Right. And if you have a relationship with people, it's easier to want to help them most of the time. So, Andy, were you going to say something?
Family members aren't afraid to argue with each other.
Ooh, family members aren't afraid to argue with each other? How many of you have siblings? Raise your hand. How many of you who have siblings have ever argued with your siblings? Yeah. That is a good point. And I'm not saying that being devoted to one another in brotherly love necessarily means arguing, but at least you can have a discussion. But having a discussion and even a disagreement with your brothers or sisters doesn't make them not your brothers and sisters anymore, right? And we need to kind of keep some of that in place in the church as well. I think another thing involved in being devoted to one another is kind of like Ashley said earlier, spending time together with each other, getting to know each other, getting to know what's going on in other people's lives, asking where can I pray for you, what can I do to help you. That is so important. And one of my biggest frustrations with church buildings, and I haven't found a way to solve this yet, is that we come in, we sit down, we stare at the back of each other's heads for an hour to 2 hours, and then we leave. And we say, man, we have had a great time of fellowship. No, we didn't. We sat in a building, we stared at the back of people's heads, and we listened to a guy talk to us for a while, and we sang some songs to the back of each other's heads. And that's why whenever we do potlucks, I will always encourage you, sit with people you don't normally sit with. Because how will we get to know other people? How will we become devoted to other people if we never spend any time with them? Right? Alan?
Our small groups get a little calcified, but that's what happens in small groups.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? That our small groups get a little calcified? They don't change. Oh.
But it's the same group of people.
Yeah.
But,
Right.
But it is where you do get to know people the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's pros and cons to fellowship groups. Is that you get to know people there, and people build relations, and they get to where they understand other people, and so you can let things slide because these are my friends now, and I want to be with them. But we can become, that's our group, and we don't really mix with many other folks, and so I think it's important for us all to take the initiative at times to spend some time with other people. Back in the day when I was a kid, growing up, I always heard, we never did this, my family, when we got together, we'd go to church on Sunday morning with Ninny and Papa, and then afterward the whole family would come together and we'd have a big meal at Ninny and Papa's house. All the cousins and everybody else would be there. But I heard that there were other people, and later in life when I became a Christian, I saw this. People would put a pot roast in before church on a Sunday morning, and then at church they would invite other people over to their house to have a meal together. Any of you remember those days? Why don't we do that anymore?
Everybody's too busy.
Everybody's too busy. How many of you eat? Okay, do you get my point? Yeah. We can spend some time with other people. So, anyway.
It's good to look at the early church.
Yeah.
Look at what they did and study that and look at that and what they were going through at particular times.
Right.
In their life as Jews.
Yep.
And the Gentiles. But we look at the Jewish people, they wanted to be together.
They wanted to be.
They wanted to be together.
Yeah.
And they desired to be together.
Right.
And they needed to be together.
Yeah. And why is that, Paula? Why did they need to be together so much?
Just to build each other up.
Yeah. They were.
Pray together. They prayed together constantly.
Yeah.
They loved each other constantly. One was in need, they took care of it.
Because they were being persecuted.
They were being persecuted.
Yeah. And I think, I will tell you, if you go back in our history, back when I was a kid, Vietnam War was going on, Korea was over, World War II wasn't that far in the past. And so our country had been through a struggle. And being together was important. Sharing meals together was important, everything. I think our life has just gotten a little too cushy. We don't really struggle that much anymore. And so if we're not struggling, we don't need others. Well, that's a lie. That is why in Hebrews we're told not to forsake the assembling of the saints. It's not because if you don't come to church, we're kicking you out. It's because there's something important that takes place when you're around others. Because you build each other up, you can share your struggles, you can help each other walk through them.
I think of 9/11 as the last time this country's really
Yeah?
pulled together.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I would hate to see another 9/11, but
Yeah.
we need something to make us pull together.
That's
Those
yeah.
people had it because they didn't travel 60 miles to go have lunch with somebody this afternoon or whatever.
Right.
It was,
Yeah.
the people that were there was the people they associated with.
Yeah. Very good point. 9/11 brought a lot of people together when people had kind of quit spending time together.
So we're American.
And COVID did the opposite. Yeah. Yeah. But we're not going to discuss that one because there was a lot that went on in there. So, any other thoughts on any of these passages that we've looked at in this section on love? All right, well, we have 2 minutes left, and so I'm not going to start on lesson 3, but read that for next week, and we'll get into lesson 3. But just want to encourage you, and this is a study of the fruits of the Spirit, how we put these into practice. The very first one is love, and there's just so much involved in loving one another as Christ loved us, that I think it's just important we spend the time really understanding what this kind of love is, how it looks, and how we put it into practice. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're not spending time with other people, start spending time with other people. If you don't like listening to people's struggles and stories, get better at it. Realize you're not in charge of fixing everything for them. That's God's job. And He's a big boy. He can do it. They just need somebody walking alongside them to remind them of that. And maybe if they come to you and they're sharing something that they're really struggling with and it's totally out of your wheelhouse, you can't even relate to it, hopefully by being in the church long enough, you know someone who's walked that path before. And you can then say, hey, have you met so-and-so? You really need to go talk to them. And then you even take them to so-and-so and you say, hey, would you spend some time with this person because they're really going through something and I think it's similar to what you've been. And if someone comes to you and asks you to do that, do it. Take the time and do it. I've shared with most of you before, my first wife and I lost a daughter at childbirth. And when I was working at the church in Amarillo, it was a church plant, and thinking about going into ministry. And mostly because of what God had done in the midst of that hardship and the way that the church rallied behind me in all of that. But so I was thinking about it, and I remember getting a call from the elders one day, and they said, "Hey, Lance, we've got a young couple. They're in the hospital. They're not married. They'd been coming to church. I'd seen them before, met them. They were not married, but she was expecting a baby. And it was right around the due date. One of the elders called me and said that they lost the baby. It died at birth. And we knew that you had gone through something like that. Would you go up and minister to them?" I had never done anything like that at all. And I remember all the way, and I told the elder, I said, "I don't know what to say to him." And he said, "Well, I don't either." He said, "I've never been through this." He said, "Just go up and be with them." And so I remember all the way up there praying. Jesus, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't have the answers for this. I'm still hurting myself. And walked into the room just totally lost. And yet God did something awesome. I mean, I walked into the room, and the young lady was laying in bed, and she just saw me and started crying. And she put her arms out like that, and I went over and gave her a big hug, and she said, "You have no idea," because I was the worship minister at the church there, because I actually had a voice back in those days. And she said, "You have no idea how much I get out of watching you guys worship on Sunday morning." And that had never even crossed my mind. And then she said, "Would you like to hold our daughter?" Now, I got to tell you, to this day, I can still feel, because when our daughter was born, the nurse wrapped her up and handed her to me, and I held her long enough. This is going to sound terrible, but I held her long enough to feel all of the heat leave her body. And when this lady asked me if I wanted to hold their daughter, all of that came back. But yet, there was something saying, "You need to do this." It was so out of my comfort zone. But church, that's what God calls us to do, is to walk with those who are weeping. That's love. All right, enough of that. Thank you for the class, and we'll pick up in chapter 3 next week.